Hello everybody, Gerald Bellena here of Hot Pixel Productions, and welcome to my latest tutorial video that I am calling Working the Water. Now this video is in response to many emails I received asking how I achieved this particular look and feel to the texture of water in either my waterfall images or any images that includes a body of fast moving water such as streams, rivers. Now this is a proprietary technique that I've developed over the last few months, and I think it's now time to share. Now the good news is that in terms of post-processing, it's pretty straightforward, incorporating a number of exposures on layers and the ability to work with layer masks and adjustment layers. Now if this is all new to you, then feel free to check out my channel where I have a number of videos on beginner's guides to working with masks and adjustment layers, etc, or just follow along and see if you get it. However, this technique does require a bit of planning out in the field, and I will show you the range of exposures it would be good to have. Now it goes without saying that because we will be working with multiple exposures, having the camera locked down good and tight on a good, strong, stable tripod will be essential to minimize any possible movement or shift in camera position during the shoot. So let's hop over into Adobe Bridge to see what I got up to. Now I'll be working with Bridge, Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop. If you're a Lightroom user, everything I will be doing up until going into Photoshop, you will be able to do in Lightroom. So here I was at a local Cascade Falls, and this is a pretty typical long exposure shot with a distinctive ethereal dreamlike feel owing to the silky smooth creamy texture of the water. Now one good thing about shooting fast moving water is that the long exposure times don't really need to be that long, unlike slow moving languid clouds that may need the use of neutral density filters to increase exposure times into multiple minutes. Now with water this look can be achieved quite easily in a number of seconds, anywhere maybe between 1 to 4 seconds. So the need for ND filters isn't necessarily essential. However, what I would earnestly recommend you do is get a circular polarizer, which helps to cut down reflections and glare off the surface of the water and any surrounding foliage. And this helps punch vibrancy, colour, and gives a greater degree of detail and clarity into the shot. Now, a CPL will also help in cutting down the amount of light entering the camera and hitting the sensor, so again, exposure time can also be extended somewhat just by using the CPL. Now for me, one of the joys about being near to and photographing waterfalls, etc., is that almost visceral experience one has there, the steam, the hiss, the spray, that thunderous roar, and in a lot of cases a wind and breeze that it can sometimes generate. Now as much as I like this particular look and feel, I began to feel that they sometimes lack a little bit in conveying a lot of those qualities. So in simple terms, all this technique really attempts to do is to try and inject and bring back some of those qualities into this particular scene. Now one of the challenges that one always faces when shooting in this kind of situation is going to be that of dynamic range. That is the tonal balance throughout the image itself. Now obviously water is going to be quite bright in terms of it's a very highly reflective surface, so you'll probably find yourself as I say, with a bit of a challenge in terms of once you start, getting the look and the exposure of the water looking quite good. More often than not, you'll tend to find that towards the top or where the sunlight is coming into the image is going to start blowing out into, as I say, you're going to get clipping. And also conversely, in the shadow areas, those probably more than likely are going to get kind of quite clogged up and pretty dark, which is pretty much is what's happened here in this particular shot. So what I then did was to set up a auto bracket shot of 3 exposures. The exposure sequence was 1 on exposure, which was this shot, and again you can see it's still pretty dark in here, but then the camera automatically fired 1 stop over and then went to 2 stops over, and you can see obviously with the 1 stop over it's kind of really lifted out the detail in these shadow areas. Now the next shot is going to be at the very other end of the spectrum. It's got to be a super fast exposure, because in the super fast exposure, which I believe, let's have a look, where is it? It's this one. What I need to do here, and what I did do, I kept the CPL on, but I opened up to f2.8. Basically any worry about higher ISO or depth of field with aperture stuff like that goes completely out the window. The main goal is you've really got to get a really fast shutter speed, because what you need to do as part of this technique is you need to be able to freeze and get the texture of the water, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to combine this texture with this long exposure, and that's basically all it is. Now, as I say here, what I did, I opened that to f2.8, and yeah, I cranked the ISO up to 3000, and it actually got me to a exposure, a shutter speed of 1,000th of a second. Now, here's something else that I also do on occasion, is that I'll go into Aperture Priority. I'll have the same setting as say 2.8 and 1,000th of a second, and what I will do, let me just go into this stack here and show you this range of exposures. Now, what I did in this case is I set the camera to a burst mode, continuous high, and it's the exact same exposure, and all I did was I held down the cable release to bang off and fire off very quickly 5 exposures. You know, I either go 4 to 5. But as I cycle through this, what you'll see will happen, although this is an incredibly fast shutter speed, in between each exposure, the form and pattern and shape of this water is changing. And what that's going to do is give me the ability to kind of cherry pick what I think might be, the most conducive, the nicest forms or shapes of the patterns and the textures. And conversely, that could mean, let's say, for example, in this exposure, I really like the pattern and form of the water here, but maybe in this exposure, I'm preferring the feel and look of the texture in this section of the image, and maybe also back here. So let us just come to this series. Now, this is what I've done. I actually then cherry picked from all those exposures what I thought was going to be the best to use in terms of the combination. As you saw, this is going to be the base, what I call the base long exposure. This is what we're going to build on. This is the one I selected in terms of the texture and form of the water. Now, this is actually quite underexposed, and that is deliberate, because also what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the darker quality of this image to help maybe try and rescue and tame and contain some of these blown out highlights here up at the top of the image. And last but by no means least, this was the +1, the one stop over from the bracketed 3 exposures, and this is the one I'm going to use, as I say, to try and pull back some of these clogged up shadows and darker areas within this particular image. So now if you look up here, you'll see that each of these 3 exposures has a little icon above it. Now that means that I've actually applied some settings to them actually in Adobe Camera Raw. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shift and click on all 3 and to select all 3, and I'm just going to double click and open them up in Adobe Camera Raw, just so you can see the minimal settings, but a couple of crucial settings that I did actually apply. Now this is obviously the long exposure, and you'll see this red pattern up here. This is because I've got my clipping warning on. It will actually show me, when I have that on, it will show me areas that are clipping and highlights that are blowing out. But in this particular exposure, I'm not worried about these at all, because that's why I have this one up my sleeve. As you see, there's no clipping warnings going on here. Again, this is the one I'm going to use, as I say, to help calm those down. And again, on the one stop over, again, not worried about it, because my main requirement for this is to just be able to kind of, as I say, use this to lift the shadows in this darker exposure of the long exposure. But with these 3 exposures selected by selecting one and then going Command or Control A to select all, these are the settings that I think it's very critical to apply. Well, one in particular. And going up under here, under the lens correction tab here. Now, what I did check was to enable the lens profile correction. Now this is very clever, because what it does is it reads the metadata from the file, and it actually detects what lens that I'm using. Now by enabling that, what that then does is it actually will correct any inherent barrel distortion that the lens actually picks up. So as you can see, by applying that, it just kind of flattens it out, relieves a bit of that barrel distortion, and also if you have got any vignetting starting to appear in your corners, it usually tends to kind of knock that out. So that's pretty useful to have. But going over to the next tab here on color, this is the really crucial one. And that is the remove chromatic aberration. Now, chromatic aberration is that cyan, magenta or green fringing that tends to appear around the edges in very, very high contrast situations. So checking that box to remove chromatic aberration is really, really key. And again, something else that I would really, really stress is that wherever possible, shoot in the RAW format, not JPEG, because shooting in RAW is going to give you this ability and give you much greater latitude in post-processing, particularly at this stage. It will allow you to remove chromatic aberration. It would also allow you to play around with white balance and many of the other tonal and color changes that you may want to instigate. Again, giving you much greater latitude and flexibility. So please shoot RAW, not in the RAW. You can get arrested for that. So what I'll do is I'll accept these changes by coming down to Done. And as you see, that would then put these back, and I would see in Bridge that they now have these little icons attached to it, meaning that I have applied some settings in Adobe Camera Raw. Now, the next thing on the agenda with these three selected is to come up under Tools, come down to Photoshop, and then select Load Files into Photoshop Layers. And this is also something that you can do in Lightroom. So here we are in Photoshop, and what Photoshop has very kindly done, as it said it would do, it has actually taken all these exposures and aligned them on, stacked them in layers one on top of the other. So this is our, or my base long exposure. This was the very, very fast shutter speed for the texture of water, and also maybe being able to use this to bring down some of those highlights. And here's the 1/over, the very bright exposure. Now in terms of stacking order, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the long exposure. I actually want that at the bottom. I want the high fast exposure texture shot above that, and the light one can go on top of that. Now, as I said, stability of the camera, not having it move or trying to minimize it as much as possible is pretty key here. Now, as I said, I do have a very, very good, strong tripod, but I will guarantee that somewhere along the line, it's either from touching the camera by taking filters on and off, that it may have shifted very, very slightly. So in order to double check that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shift click on all of these to select all of these layers. Now if I press my V key, it will put me into the move tool, and it'll bring up a bunch of icons at the top here. Now on the immediate right here, you will see two little bars with dots on it. That is the icon to click on, that to auto align the layers. That means that Photoshop is going to take care, it's going to analyze it, and it's going to do hopefully a great job of making sure it's pixel perfect in terms of its alignment. You can also find that command under Edit, come down to Auto Align Layers. So whichever way you want to do it, it's going to be the same result. So let's just select Auto Align Layers, see what happens. So once you do that, the Auto Align Layers dialog box comes up, and it's straightforward. Just leave it on auto, accept it, OK, and it'll think about it, and it's going to go through and it's going to analyze the image and hopefully give us a spot on alignment. Right, there you go. And let me just toggle off this layer. You can see, yeah, there was a little bit of movement there, and so what it's done is realigned it so that it is fully pixel perfect in terms of its alignment. So let me just turn that back on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and select my crop tool, any corner. I'm going to hold down the Option key as I start to drag inward, and that's going to bring it in towards the center uniformly, same aspect ratio, maybe to about there. Yeah, good enough. Double click, accept that crop, and there I've taken out all that kind of misalignment. Right, so here we are. Now the next task, what I want to do is I want to duplicate. What's it doing? Don't do that. There you go. I want to duplicate this layer, and there's a reason for that, which will become clear a little bit later on. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press Command or Control J, and that gives me a duplicate of that layer. Let me just turn this one on again. And so what I want to do now is I just now want to add masks to each of these layers that are going to hide as I say, the respective layer on the stage. Now in order to do that, I'm going to select this top one. I'm going to come down to the little rectangle with a hole in it, and before I click on it, I'm just going to press the Option or Alt key, and that will immediately attach a black layer mask, thus obscuring it and not allowing it to show through. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the layer below. No change there because it's the same as this one, and also put a layer mask. Now that's hidden that, so this is the only one that we've got showing. Now what I want to do is that I want to start to bring back in some parts of this darker exposure to bring down some of the highlights. Now I'm going to do this very, very quickly. Normally I would probably take, well, not exactly hours, but you know, if I wanted to be really targeted, I might create a luminosity mask and this, that, and the other, but that's not for this video. All I would need to do is I'm going to come down here to make sure that my foreground is set to white. I'm going to select my brush by pressing the B key, and I'm going to start tapping on my right bracket key to enlarge it. Now I'm going to set the brush's opacity at this juncture. I'm going to set it. I'm going to hit my 5 number key. It's going to make that'll turn the opacity of this brush to about 50%. I'm just going to start stroking, targeting this black mask. I'm going to start ghosting, revealing this exposure. As I say, white reveals, black conceals. By painting white on it, it's allowing this layer to start to show through, and you can see what I'm able to do is to start bringing down some of these highlights. And I think at this juncture I'm going to just press the 0 key to take it up to full strength, 100%. Very soft brush, just bring that down there. Oops, went a little bit too far. So okay, all I need to do is just press X to toggle to make the foreground black and paint black back onto this mask, and that will then knock that out if I've just encroached a little bit too. As I say, I am doing this very, very fast because I know you've probably got better things to do than watch me tittle around with this all night. Okay, so that's calmed down some of the highlights. What I want to do now is look to this brighter exposure to start to ghost back in and reveal a little bit more detail in these shadows. So same thing. Now I'm going to press number 2 on my keypad to make the opacity of this brush 20%. Going to make sure that the mask is targeted, not the image itself. You don't want to start painting on that. Trust me, I've done that a million times, and all you get is just a great big white splodge all over it. It's like, oh god, what have I done? You must make sure you click on the mask and make sure it's targeted by looking to see that the white brackets are around it. That indicates that it's selected. And again, I want to come over here. I want to press the X key to toggle to make this brush fill with white paint, 20%, and I'm just going to start gently brushing into these areas here. Got a little bit too far. Maybe I just want to take that back. 100%. Yeah, I just want to get rid of that one. I went too far. White again, 20%. Just a little bit. Maybe 50% will be here all night. Okay, that's good. Okay. Let's start waking this up around here. Yeah, it's bringing that might be a bit too hot. But this again is the beauty and power of using layer masking like this, because you know, if ever you get into a situation whereby you know you've taken it a little bit too far, that's probably a bit too much, but there you go. All you need to do is just come up with the layer selected and come up to the opacity slider and just bring the opacity down a bit, and that'll reduce the amount of presence. So now this is kind of where the magic starts, if you can kind of call it magic. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to select the first copy of that very, very fast shutter speed water texture and select its mask. Now I'm going to, same thing, brush filled with white, and I'm going to reduce its opacity down to 20% by hitting the 2 key, and I'm literally going to start tapping on the mask to very subtly ghost back in some of that texture. Now the catch-all word here is definitely subtlety. You know, take it nice and easy, and literally I'm just clicking one click, 20%, and it's starting to reveal and bring back a little bit more of that texture into these parts of the water. I'll stroke there. And maybe a little bit over here. Yep, I'll start to bring that. And what it is, as you can see what's starting to happen, it's starting to bring a little bit more energy and texture and form back into. I'll bring it about nice in the distance, that doesn't bring so much. A little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit there. I think you get the idea. And again, I am doing this very quickly. It actually doesn't really take an awful lot. I mean, that in essence is really all it is. And you can see if I just toggle this on and off, going from that to that. Now, I don't know what your subjective tastes are, but I mean, to me, this just kind of really does. You kind of start to really kind of almost like hear and feel, you know, the hiss and spray of that water. You know, as I say, the blending of the texture and pattern of the very, very fast shutter speed shot into that very kind of ethereal, creamy texture of the long exposure. As I say, you know, it kind of bridges the gap. Now, as is always the case, if for whatever reason you've taken it a little bit too far, you can either, you know, hit the X key, toggle to fill the brush with black and just, you know, start painting some of that out, you know, knocking it back. Alternatively, again, you just come up with the layer selected, come under its opacity, and maybe just, you know, pull back on the opacity so not as much shows through. So again, you know, you can play around with your heart content. So in essence, I mean, that's kind of it. And as I say, I mean, this really was to do mainly with, basically all to do with just, you know, showing you how, you know, you can create this kind of like hybrid texture that, as I say, still retains a lot of that nice sort of ethereal glow and softness of a long exposure. But as I say, injecting it with, bringing back maybe some more of that kind of visceral energy and you know, dynamism of, you know, a very, very fast, powerful moving body of water like a waterfall. So here is the final image that I created based off of that process. And so let me just take you through a few other shots that I've done that has incorporated that technique. This was a shot up at Shahola Falls up in Pennsylvania. Exact same approach and technique. A base long exposure, then a very, very fast shutter speed to capture the water form and texture, and again put on a layer and just very, very subtly ghosted back in just to bring back a little bit more energy into the shot. And let's have a look at this one. Yep, this is Trout Creek. Exact same process. Base long exposure, very, very high shutter speed for the texture, ghosted back in. But just to reiterate again, it can be applied to any form of you know, fast moving body of water, and this is Sandberg Creek near to where I live. I did the exact same thing, base long exposure, very, very high shutter speed, and again, as I say, masked back in and ghosted back in Photoshop. This is the Vinoy Kill Falls. Again, base long exposure, then did multiple very, very fast shutter speeds, you know, cherry pick what I thought was the best textural form and just kind of ghosted it back in on top of the long exposure to come to something like this. So anyway, I hope I've not bored you to death, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you maybe some new ideas to approaches you could possibly incorporate into some of your own work. And so, needless to say, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next go round. Bye for now.